Good afternoon. Welcome to Spy Chat. I'm Amanda Olkey, Director of Adult Education at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us. Today, our Executive Director, Chris Costa, is joined by Dexter Ingram, Senior Advisor, U.S. Department of State. And I will excitingly tell you before I give Dex his full introduction that he is joining us on the road from West Africa. So what time is it? What's the weather like? And then I'll introduce you, Dex.
It is 6:01. The weather is about 102 degrees. Yeah, it's a dry heat. So thanks, Amanda.
Awesome. All right. Dex is a counterterrorism and counter weapons of mass destruction strategist with over 25 years of experience. He has served as an advisor to the Special Presidential Envoy for the Global Coalition to Defeat ISIS, Senior Counterterrorism Advisor to INTERPOL in Lyon, France, Senior Political Advisor in Helmand, Afghanistan, Deputy Director of the State Department's Preventing WMD Terrorism Team, and as a Senior Liaison to the FBI and DHS. Dex led many U.S. interagency delegations to Asia and Africa, focusing on nuclear proliferation deterrence. In 2010, he became the first U.S. recipient of the International Counterterrorism Fellowship at National Defense University. He has focused extensively on how information sharing through law enforcement channels ensures American safety. Dex began his career as a naval flight officer, fueling his dedication to public service. He serves on the Spy Museum's advisory board. He is a great friend and supporter of our educational programs, in person and virtual. So after Chris and Dex discuss the issues that are catching their attention, we'll turn to your questions. And if you've been with us before, or if you're new, we use the Q&A feature. So just write those questions in and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as possible towards the end of the program. One last note before I turn this program over to Chris. I want to thank Spy Museum board member Catherine Wood, who has provided generous support for this program. Thank you so much, Catherine. Over to you, Mr. Costa.
Hey, Amanda, thank you very much. And thanks to our team. Our team was up late last evening doing other programs. So I'm so grateful that we're back here today at the Spy Museum doing a Zoom session with my friend Dex Ingram, who I've met overseas. We connected when I was serving in the previous presidential administration, and Dex has a great reputation. He is actively working for State Department, so there's some things he won't talk about today, but for the most part, or he can't talk about, for the most part, it is tremendous to have his expertise here to talk about a range of issues. And Dex, in particular, you're calling in from West Africa. You're a great friend of the Spy Museum and a personal friend, so thanks for calling in. Without further ado, I want to jump right into what I'm tracking in terms of national security strategies that got my stories that got my attention. First and foremost, no surprise, I've got to talk about balloons. I'm going to try not to make any puns. I'm not going to do it deliberately. It's an important story, and our historian, Dr. Andrew Helmand, has done a tremendous job on multiple levels with media, telling the story of balloons, both operationally and through a historical lens. But from my standpoint, the story has garnered my attention because these balloons are operating in near space. And that is a gray zone, in quotes, if you will, where we are now competing with China and other states. What am I talking about? The gray zone we're talking about, or the near space, is from about 60,000 feet to some 330,000 feet, meaning where satellites don't operate. U-2s can operate there, of course, Dragon Ladies or U-2 spy planes. There was a U-2 picture of the actual balloon that drifted into ultimately U.S. airspace, shot down over the Atlantic somewhere near South Carolina. All of that said, there is a history of balloons operating from the French Revolution to the First World War, the American Civil War, the Second World War, and there was a robust program run by the United States in the 1950s. So we shouldn't be surprised that old technologies vis-a-vis balloons are being amped up today with different technology packages. And that's what I think ultimately will be exploited by the FBI lab in Quantico, and we'll find out that there was perhaps a signals intelligence package, an imagery package, as well as MEASIN sensors, meaning measures and signatures intelligence, meaning sniffers or some kind of capability to look at the atmosphere, for example. We don't know yet, but of course, we're all collectively anxious to find out just what was on that Chinese collection platform. The other balloons that were shot down seem to have been sports balloons or weather balloons operating in that same near space. All of that said, we should not be surprised that China operates in that near space with an intelligence platform to loiter over the United States or other targets that they have in mind. In fact, it sounds like this balloon drifted with the wind and maybe became untethered or uncontrollable at some point. We just don't know yet, or maybe the story's been updated. All of that said, it's an important story, and we can certainly cover it in questions and answers. The last point on balloons is it is part of a vast surveillance program executed by the Chinese. The United States, and it's been reported, all of course open source, the United States knows that Hainan, I think I'm saying it right, in China, is where these balloons are literally launched from. So this is a story that won't go away. It obviously took the news cycle for the last couple of weeks, so I wanted to address it right up front. Another platform I'll make brief reference to, so I'm transitioning now to a spy ship. Back in January, there was a spy ship off the coast of Hawaii in the economic exclusion zone, which means outside the 12 nautical miles that the United States and the world claims as sovereign space. All of that said, the idea of a spy ship operating off the coast of Hawaii is no surprise. Surface and air assets from the United States Navy will track it closely. What is it looking for? This is a Russian spy ship. It is looking for patterns of the U.S. 7th Fleet. More than likely, it will have sensors to track what U.S. Pacific Command is doing. In the past, these spy ships have been seen in the off the Atlantic coast of the United States. Sometimes they turn off their running lights and they can be a navigation hazard. The Coast Guard will track them. But we should just be reminded by balloons and by naval assets that intelligence platforms are from undersea all the way to space. So the idea that there would be a Navy platform from the Soviets, a spy ship off the coast of Hawaii, is no surprise. I think last year or in the last couple of years, there have also been some spy ships off the coast of Alaska with Chinese naval assets. So that is certainly of interest to the United States. All right, moving on, changing gears completely. I have talked about this in the past. In the context of the war in Ukraine, I want to foot stomp another story that was published in the Washington Post that talked about the president of Moldova expressing concern about subversion by the Russian government in Moldova. I've talked about that in the past. I know Moldova historically, and I've done some analysis in the past of Moldova's political geography as it relates to Russia. And I truly think they are extremely vulnerable. And this story bears it out that Russia is trying to subvert Moldova, trying to undermine a democratic country that is certainly in the Western orbit. So that's a story we should pay attention to. President Zelensky has made sure his Ukrainian intelligence assets have supported some collection, evidently, that's gone to Moldova. So the president of Moldova has been armed with intelligence from a foreign partner, Ukrainians. So that's something we will watch in the future. All right, transitioning to counterterrorism. I'm sure Dex, being an expert on terrorism, will have some perspectives on ISIS. But I want to underscore a article that I wrote. I think we'll be able to post it, an op-ed on the Sapoff case. The Sapoff case was a individual by the name of Safulo Sapoff that on in Halloween, I'm sorry, in October 31st of 2017, Sapoff got in a vehicle on a Manhattan bike path, and his objective was to kill people, innocent people that were running or walking or biking on that bike path. He wanted to kill moms pushing babies. It's a terrible, terrible terrorist attack. It was the major terrorist attack that happened during my watch at the National Security Council. So I was intimately involved with the aftermath of the Sapoff case. And frankly, he was a wannabe Sapoff. He didn't take direction from ISIS, but he was inspired by ISIS, and he acted on that inspiration, and he killed innocent people. Last week, I had an opportunity to sit in on the sentencing of Sapoff, the sentence hearing, where he faces a death penalty. If he is he's already been convicted, but if there's a death penalty passed, and if that is followed up by his execution with lethal injection, this will be the first time there's been an execution in the state of New York since 1963. And before that, a federal crime was back in the 1950s when an FBI agent was killed and somebody was executed for that. And then going back a little further, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg were executed. So this is a case that you should pay attention to. It should break any day now when a decision is made to execute or not execute Sapoff. The last point I want to make about Sapoff is listening to the witnesses talk about the horror of that day and the victimization and the impact on their families is something that is really, really hard to watch, but it's important to hear and to watch. Next story, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I had published an op-ed that underscores the point that, in my humble opinion, we're moving into a new wave of terrorism globally. Historians and terrorist experts will make the point that waves in terrorism last about 40 years. We've been in a religious wave that's gone on roughly on or about since the 1990s, right? In the birth of Al-Qaeda in the late 1980s through the present day. Essentially, we've been in this counter ISIS fight, counter Al-Qaeda fight. I believe we're now moving into a new wave, and that wave is going to be anti-government terrorism, meaning some far-right groups are going to be animated to go after local governments. Grievances are going to be manifest in terms of political violence, and no country will be immune. And that's not to be alarmist. It's just a trend. And I'll give you an example that kind of turned my thinking on this. Back in December, there was a would-be coup that played out in Germany. It was coming from the far right. All of that said, you saw what played out in Brazil, Germany, problems here in the far right, people animated to go after the US government, groups like Atomwaffen, a neo-Nazi organization that is very much anti-government. It's a trend. It doesn't mean that there won't be any ISIS-driven terrorism or jihadist terrorism. It's just something law enforcement will look at, and it will help align resources toward the appropriate threats. That's why the United States, in the aftermath of President Biden being elected, I think 4 months later, there was a domestic terrorism strategy that was published. So obviously the administration sees that milieu as an important concern. And lastly, just to close out that discussion, I talked about Atomwaffen, a neo-Nazi group, mostly here in the United States. There was a plot disrupted in Baltimore, not too far from Washington, D.C. It was an Atomwaffen founder that was released from prison, served his time, came together with a woman he met while he was in prison, corresponded with. They came together and they were going to go after the electric grid. They were going to go after power stations using small arms. They weren't going after people targets, but they were going to try to shut down the electric grid, if you will, and cause a disruption. So that's an example of the kind of disruption we will likely see in the future. That's my argument. Love to hear some questions on that. So I went on longer than I wanted to, but there is a lot of national security stories that have been breaking out. Lastly, I just want to make a book recommendation, a fun, really super interesting book called The Lion and the Fox. I think you could see that. Two rival spies in the secret plot to build the Confederate Navy. We don't have a lot of books on spying during the American Civil War. That said, there are some excellent books, but this is a story that's seldom told. It's the Confederacy building a secret navy. So overseas in dockyards across England, the Confederates were trying to hide their money, hide their construction capabilities. They were trying to build a secret Confederate Navy and get those vessels and break the Union blockade, the northern blockade of the South, and get those vessels to the Confederacy to fight and support Confederate objectives. So we're talking about foreign Confederate skullduggery on the ground in England. It's a great spy story. It's fun, and I really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend it. And it's a very quick read. So I will now turn over remarks to Dex. Can't wait to hear from you, Dex.
Thanks, Chris. I'm excited to be here. You ran down a lot of really important, key, up-to-date issues. And that's one of the great things that I love about the Spy Museum, the work that you do, the work that Amanda and her team does. It takes not just the fun aspect of the Spy Museum, but the current, the up-to-date, the educational piece. It looks at different programming for the elderly, for children. It's really something for everyone. So thank you for all that you do. I just landed in West Africa about 2 hours ago. I'm glad I could make it. I was concerned at first that the timing wouldn't work out perfectly. Flights get missed, things happen. It is hot here, but we're here to do some good work with our partners in Africa. As Amanda mentioned, I work and kind of help coordinate the global coalition to defeat ISIS, which is truly a global coalition. It's 85 partners around the world. We have not just countries, like the traditional Germanys and Saudi Arabias and Turkeys, but we also have INTERPOL and the EU and NATO. So it's a really agile, flexible group of folks that are focusing on defeating ISIS globally. It initially started with CORE in Iraq and Syria. We were able to destroy the territorial progress that ISIS has made. And now we're looking at things happening globally in Africa, for instance. In the last year or two, we saw upticks on lethality of attacks when it comes to the Congo, when it comes to Mozambique, when it comes to West Africa, specifically ISIS attacks. It's important that we address these and that we work with our African partners to build capacity and capability and listen to what they need. When you have a coalition of 85 partners working on a common goal, staying flexible, using common sense approaches, you have a winning solution, and we're seeing progress. We don't try to put together, the puzzle and say, here's the puzzle. We go into the conversation saying, okay, we have a 15% solution. What do you think about this? Is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Are you interested in this? Is this important for your country? And then we build that out over time to get to that 95% solution. Currently in Africa, we're trying to understand what is happening on the counterterrorism initiatives and programming front. There's no kind of overall global assessment of all the counterterrorism related programs. While we're the Defeat ISIS coalition, We're not just going to, we're going to understand that the programs we put together to defeat ISIS can be used to stop other terrorism groups out there. So, when I was at Interpol, for instance, they would send a team to Mali that would go into prisons because so many people there were under fake names. They didn't know who they had. And for very low cost, like a DNA swab, taking a picture, getting a fingerprint, you were able to identify, a small portion of who you were actually holding. And a lot of times they're wanted for different terrorism causes. This is low-hanging fruit, but it's common sense approaches that are making these things happen. We're looking at ISIS Khorasan and basically Afghanistan and Pakistan. Afghanistan is actually a member of the coalition, but because there's no viable government there, it makes it really tough to do some of the things that we might usually do when it comes to combating ISIS Khorasan. But we can do things like work with countries that aren't part of the coalition. For instance, a lot of Central Asian countries, on the border there, they're seeing ISIS Khorasan members come and go. So we're working to build their capacity at the border so that they can better share information and understand who is transiting through their border spaces. And that's kind of a new situation because typically we work with partners only. But now we're at the point where we say, okay, we understand ISIS-K is a threat. Afghanistan's not a viable partner right now. Who can we work with? So we pull on these observers and we listen to them. And it's been a really successful program so far. We're doing the same thing in Africa. Mozambique's not a member of the coalition, but we want to pull them in and have them talk to us about their thoughts, their priorities, their concerns. These are where we want to go. You touched on the lone wolf attack. Those are things that are always very concerning to all of us in the community. You mentioned the witness statements. We really need to work on highlighting these witness statements. This narrative that comes from the witnesses is moving, it's touching, it's real. And it does impact the narrative that these terrorist groups are putting out there. It was really interesting. I was talking with John Kirby a couple weeks ago in a group chat, and he was talking about the enemy basically sending out a lot of misinformation, of course, and we all know the enemy does that, and it's hard to kind of counter that. But what we need to do, I think, is better share information through declassifying certain things. We were able to declassify the North Korea Wagner Group connection, and that shined light on the issue and allowed us to kind of sanction the Wagner Group to a certain extent. These are the things that we need to do. My coalition partners, they know they're always going to get what we know, what we don't know, and what we think. Again, we're not trying to be perfect when we build these things out, and the trust is there. When you're sitting there talking to the French ambassador and he's saying, "Are you sure you're going to stay in Syria?" And you're like, "Yep, absolutely." And then 2 weeks later, there's an announcement, we're pulling out of Syria. He understands that it wasn't an announcement that was kind of thought through and coordinated. He understands, and he still trusts you because he realizes you're giving him the best information you have at that moment in time. So that trust is important. I mean, we text the special envoys and the counterterrorism coordinators globally every single day. We have really good relationships. Our leadership has been second to none. We have a new deputy special envoy, Ian McCary, who just brings so much gravitas to the table. He used to be the deputy chief of mission in Kabul. Our office director, Doug Hoyt, is he's a true diplomat where he can see things before they happen. So I just want to kind of highlight the amazing team we have. Our team is, a multinational team. We have folks from all different, we've had folks from all different agencies previously. Right now, we have a lot of different folks from different parts of the State Department kind of coming together to fight this fight. But we've had transatlantic diplomatic fellows. We have one now, but we've had ones from Italy and Germany and the Czech Republic and Hungary and the UK and France. And it's a true coalition in that sense as well. Something that I always talk to my folks about is be intentional in what you're doing. So, it's intentional for us to pull in other diplomats into our office space, into our team, and also talk to the different embassies in DC on a daily basis. I mean, it's a blast to be able to work with people that you enjoy working with, that you trust, because it's a very chaotic world. And I always say, embrace the chaos. Things are very dynamic. Certain partners want things that other partners don't want. The world is constantly changing. There are governments you can work with, governments you can't work with, but we're always looking for solutions. And then that's something that our team does really, really, really well. You know, I hear a lot about folks asking me, you know, how do you get into this world? You know, this is Black History Month, and we had a survey in the State Department come out recently. And, you know, I think a lot of folks were disappointed because we need to be more intentional of recruiting people who haven't historically been a part of this counterterrorism or intelligence world. When I say be intentional, you know, when I was growing up, I had my dad who was in the Navy, so I saw a little bit of that. But a lot of the kids in the communities that I work in and my kids go to school in don't see people that look like them doing the things that we do. So I think we have to be really intentional of going out there and talking to them and just letting them see, hey, you know, this is a possibility. I'm not any different than you are. I've got to do some really great things. And how did that happen? That came from like following my passion. That came from saying, okay, this speaks to me. I was never going, what's the best thing for my career? The whole time it was, okay, that seems like the coolest, sexiest, neatest job ever. I want to do that because it speaks to me. Other folks might want to do something different. I've had folks go into, you know, the space policy arena before it was popular, like, you know, recently, and they're just excelling because they were doing things that were speaking to them. Some folks go into geospatial technology and they excel at that. The stuff that I got to do led me to work with good people within the U.S. government and outside the U.S. government. Interpol, never thought that was going to happen. But again, when you do something and you do it and you're excited about it and you're passionate about it, people say, I want him or her on my team. So, you know, this is just a blast for me. And I want to thank you guys again for having me on. I look forward to the questions.
Well, we have a lot of them, which are exciting. And I'm gonna go with a super technical one first, because one of you or both of you know the answer or you don't. So last night, our guest asked last night on Wednesday, February 22nd, there was an update on the object shot down over Lake Huron. And there was audio from inside an F-22 Raptor. When first reported, it said an F-16 shot and missed shooting the object down the first time. So here's the very specific question. Was it an F-22 or an F-16 that shot down the object over Lake Huron the second time?
Chris, I'll defer to you. I was flying. I was in the air last night, so I was not privy.
I truly do not know. I feel confident that the F-22 shot down the Iran balloon over South Carolina, Atlantic Ocean, but it sounds to me like it was a different platform. It may have been an F-16, but I'm not sure. And I guess, you know, there were some people that were really critical of, you know, the expensive missile missing, you know, and maybe an amateur's balloon, you know, or a hobbyist's balloon. You know, I can't really speak to that either, except for to say that the winds play a significant role. It might not be as easy as it seems, or the United States would have handedly put down the balloon. So what I'm comfortable knowing is that the F-22 put down a balloon that was the principal target early on over South Carolina, or over the Atlantic Ocean off the South Carolina coast. I'm not sure about the other balloons, whether it was F-16s or other aircraft.
All right. And I am actually working on a talk tomorrow about black dispatches. And of course, we get to talk about the spy balloons in the Peninsula campaign in the Civil War. So it's just so fun. These balloons just keep appearing throughout our history. Okay, we are moving away from the balloons. So this is a good broad question. We hear what foreign powers do to spy on the US. Is it fair to say that the US is likely doing the same to spy on other countries?
You know, one of the first things I did when I got out of the Navy was get pulled into the China EP3 situation where they had kind of clipped one of our EP3s, and the pilot was a hero in this case, was able to kind of get control of the plane and land in China. There's always surveillance, there's always monitoring. If you go to the Spy Museum, you'll see the caveman climbing the tree, wanting to see where the food is, wanting to see where the danger is. We're always going to be curious about what people are doing, and they're going to be curious about what we're doing. And it's not just defense, it's also economic. There's a lot of different levels to it. So, you know, are there spies around the world? Yes, there are. Are most partners curious and wanting to get that advantage? Absolutely.
Yeah, I would just add, it's a great question. We explore espionage across the globe here at the International Spy Museum. We will demonstrate not only through current events and programs like this, but also through our artifacts that spying is universal. It's international. It has a global flavor. And certainly as a career intelligence officer, we do spy on other countries. I will just make the point that most of my work was spying directed at terrorists and the terrorism threat. But the balloons are a great example. The North and South spied on each other during the Civil War. The United States had a balloon program in the 1950s. And now the Chinese are operating in the space that we talked about, the near space. And the United States may be exploring on how to operate in that space as well. So there's a constant back and forth to answer policymakers' questions. There's an insatiable appetite for collection that serves policymakers. So the short answer is yes, spying is universal. The current administration is apparently debating whether they're going to release information, declassify information that China is planning on supporting Russia with actual weaponry. So if that intelligence is released to the public, again, it will underscore that somebody somewhere is conducting espionage, either technical or human intelligence. So great question.
Here's another very good, very broad question. With so many priorities, Russia, Ukraine, domestic terrorism, the Middle East, what is the thinking behind distributing resources to cover as many bases as thoroughly as possible? And if you've got the answer, ironclad answer, I'm sure everyone on Capitol Hill would like to know.
Well,
Chris, I'll defer to you on that one.
Yeah, so I would just make the point that, first of all, we have a national counterterrorism strategy, and the strategy outlines, at least as far as I know, there's a current strategy that maybe was not released to the public, and I'm not going to put Dex on the hook here. I have not seen a new strategy since 2018, but there may be a strategy that's classified. All that said, once a strategy is published, released, or the interagency settles on a strategy, then resources are apportioned to the threats. Now, there's also a national security strategy, which outlines the broad threats. There's a national military strategy. The strategies are designed so that people that resource can ensure that the appropriate resources are addressing the appropriate threats. So that is a constant process in the United States. It arguably begins at the National Security Council, and it trickles across the rest of the government. Some of those strategies are published, some of them are not. But the point is, there are a lot of competing resources. We can do counterterrorism and can counter malign Chinese influence. We can do great power competition and counterterrorism. We can worry about North Korea and at the same time apportion resources to focus on malign Russian activities, military activities in West Africa or in Africa, on the continent of Africa. So we're a big nation. We have lots of resources. Yes, tough decisions have to be made on priorities. So we're not going to be everywhere all the time, but the United States will assess resources based on the threat. So that's how I would answer a really tough question.
So, Chris, I would also add to that, the Biden administration recently did put out a document that it talked about working with partners on key issues. And those key issues are related to terrorism. Those key issues are related to the climate change. Those key issues are related to a variety of different things that we can't do by ourselves. So, working with partners, building coalitions, staying nimble, and addressing threats as they emerge is something that is a part of the new strategy.
Hey, thanks for that, Dex. And I just want to put a finer point on something from earlier, and it relates to what you just offered. And that is your work on the counter-ISIS coalition really is emblematic of what the United States with coalition partners try to achieve. When I was in the administration, the Trump administration, there were 73 coalition partners that were aligned to work against ISIS globally. The work that you do is symbolic and is a great representation of working with foreign partners, because the United States realizes the United States cannot fight ISIS globally alone, and that's not the objective. So working with partners is absolutely crucial, and the work that you do, Dex, is absolutely pivotal to addressing, these multi-dimensional threats.
And just one more piece to this. It's neat because we talked about not leaving the core, but staying in the core, addressing that, Iraq and Syria, but also looking at Africa. And if you look at the last few countries that have joined the coalition, which is 85 members strong now, it's been Benin, it's been Burkina Faso, it's been key partners where the threat is real and they need this help and they want to work with us. So it's trending in a positive way on the coalition side, but also there's a trend that we're seeing on the terrorism side that we need to counter.
Great point.
So
What else?
sorry.
Nope, I was just going to say, what else we have? It looks like we've got a lot of questions, Amanda.
Yeah, we have a lot of good questions too. Dex, someone really zeroed in on your comment about saying, we'd stay in Syria and then the situation changed suddenly. And this person wants to know, how do you address those changes with partners in a way that maintains your relationship and their trust?
Again, that's a daily thing. That's 100% daily piece. That's having tough conversations. That's being realistic about what they can do and what you can do. It's about, supporting what our government wants to get done, but also listening to them. And when you put on these events, we have 85 members. So we have an annual ministerial, right? And imagine 60, 70 foreign ministers, including Secretary Blinken. That's a mini UN like General Assembly, a mini UNGA, basically. There's so much value in there. And when you put these on, you have to have tough conversations with different partners. Some are key allies, and you're always just being transparent. You're always being honest. You're sharing what you know, you're telling them why, and sometimes you're delivering bad news. That's my job sometimes. I get sent, Dexter, go into the meeting, say this, say that, say this. And I'll do it. Now, you do it in a way that doesn't embarrass anybody. You do it in a way that's straightforward. You do it in a way that's fair. And again, transparent. People respect that.
Anything you want to add, Chris, from I know you've had many partners.
Yeah, no, what Dex said is perfect, right? It's the idea of building trust on an individual level as well. And when policy decisions are made beyond the scope of an individual, Dex as an individual or me as a senior in the previous administration, at the end of the day, most partners understand that it's beyond our individual control. So we work together, but mutual respect, having rapport with a partner is all important. And the Kurds are still with us in Syria. The United States is still on the ground, working with partners on the ground in Syria, despite the kerfuffle back in 2018, I believe, December 19th, to be specific, when the announcement was made, the United States is going to withdraw. The United States is still there. And when a decision was made that the United States is going to leave Somalia, I didn't like that decision. I had already left the administration. Now, U.S. military forces can go back on the ground and have a footprint on the ground in Somalia. So these decisions go back and forth, depending on the administration, depending on the threat. And people in this business are very pragmatic.
So Chris, and obviously Dex to comment on, but it's so close to Chris. Sapoff's possible execution. This guest wants to know if you think that if he is executed, that if it will rev up anti-government terrorism.
Anti-government terrorism. So it's hard to say. First of all, I have no sense on where the jury is going to land. I watched the jury, and there are people that are experts at this. I'd like to think I know body language, but certainly it is really hard, one snapshot in time, watching the jury, watching the defendant, listening to gut-wrenching personal impact of terrorism on human beings. And Dex made that point. It is so important to listen to that. So I don't know if there is an execution, if there's going to be significant impact. Candidly, I think that if somebody is held hostage, for example, somewhere in the world, they are at risk. If then an ISIS terrorist is executed, that gives them an excuse. But it's really hard to divine what can happen as a result of an execution. The bottom line, a lot of these groups simply will use it for their leverage. As I said, they will exploit it if they can. They'll talk about the hypocrisy of the United States, for example, killing somebody at a state level. So at the end of the day, it's really hard to know. But I do want to go back, not a direct question from the guest, but to what Dex said about the personal and the human impact of bystanders, witnesses. One of the witnesses said, "My life was ruined." A young man, a young dad who lost his wife, the mother of his children, said his life is ruined. It's really important, not just here in the United States, but to understand that there are victims across the globe, and understanding the impact on those victims is absolutely crucial, because terrorism by definition is executed against non-combatants, civilians, innocents, arguably.
Absolutely.
We have a couple. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Amanda. I agree wholeheartedly with Chris. We've done a lot. I mean, overseas, we've taken out a number of ISIS leaders. And domestic terrorism is an issue that is showing its ugly head in a way that I think is developing on many different fronts. We're just going to have to stay ahead of it. I used to tell people, when I was in the WMD world, okay, when I was in the Navy, we had a saying, rules are written in blood. So if you walk within 10 feet of a jet engine and you get sucked inside a jet engine, change the rules. Don't walk within 10 feet of a jet engine. Well, we did that after 9/11. 9/11 happened, and we changed a lot of the rules. We created the Department of Homeland Security. We created the Homeland Security committees in Congress. And then after that, we went through this phase where we were creating groups to stop terrorists from getting WMDs. So the State Department created its WMD terrorism team. The FBI created its WMD directorate. Interpol created its CBRNE terrorism directorate. And I got to be a part of all of that. The reason we did that was we didn't want to make those rules written in blood after they happened. We wanted to think about, okay, let's get ahead of the game. And that's what we're going to have to do domestically. We're really going to have to share information, connect the dots, make sure law enforcement are talking. I want to make sure that that bomb in Mali that goes off, that used to go into the intelligence channels and kind of sit there, is now, that information is shared with law enforcement. So we can get that fingerprint off of it and connect it to that taxi driver in Prague who we never knew was there. Those are the kind of common sense things that we need to start changing, and that we are changing.
He had a very interesting question, because it comes from Oxford, England, wanting to know how, to what extent is the UK an ally of the current administration?
Oh, the UK is a great ally. We have a very special relationship. I talk to my UK counterpart in DC all the time. We have a number of meetings in London every year when it comes to defeating ISIS. They actually host our coalition communication cell, where they are constantly putting out counter messaging and highlighting things that are successes. They're wonderful partners, and I just can't say enough about our UK colleagues.
The question was about this administration, and you answered that, Dex, and I can just underscore the point. The last administration, the same. All of our Five Eye partners are tremendous. The Brits in particular are excellent partners. And of course, they're not unknown to us here at the International Spy Museum. I am friends with the British liaison officers. The partnership is deep in previous administrations and in the current administration. I can safely say that. So thank you for that.
A question about Chinese intelligence operations, and wondering if they have enhanced their intelligence operations, or if, if this is mainly a US audience or a Western audience, or is this audience just hearing more about Chinese intelligence operations?
Chris?
So I can take that question. First of all, a little advertising. Please join us next week for a spy chat with the head of counterintelligence from the FBI, Alan Kohler. It's going to be an extraordinary program, and he will address that question, I'm sure, head on. The Chinese are a significant threat to U.S. interests, but other Western interests. And the head of MI5 has come out, the head of the British Security Service has publicly talked about this, standing side by side with Director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, talking about malign Chinese activities. And I explicitly, actually at 1 o'clock, there should be a Hill piece that comes out making reference to Chinese espionage operations and the FBI's ability to disrupt Chinese operations against the United States, but it's not directed just against the United States. For example, I think not too long ago in The Hague, there were some complaints out of the Netherlands that the Chinese are setting up essentially police outposts, to go after dissidents in the Netherlands. That same pattern is happening here in the United States. And the FBI disrupted cases last October. Some dozen Chinese intelligence officers were disrupted in 3 different cases. So Chinese espionage operations are becoming extremely aggressive, and the Ministry of State Security is very effective. They're efficient. So yes, Chinese espionage operations are conducted not just against the West, but against the United States, and they are a significant threat. And the FBI has been public about that threat, and I really laud that publicity, if you will. I think it's really important for not only businesses to understand the dimensions of the threats, but as well as other government employees being mindful that they are a target of foreign intelligence officers. But please tune in next week and ask Alan yourself.
Dex, if you don't want to add that, we have kind of 2 bookended questions, comments. One wondering if too many things are classified or too many things, this is very wide ranging. Are too many things classified? I think there was a big article about that over the weekend, that just the level of classification. But also on the other hand, we have a good friend of the museum, a former intelligence operative, who feels like we're giving too much away now. Or is there too much in open source? Is Congress getting information that then gets out for our foreign friends and adversaries to pick apart? So I think it's just a broad, conversation about that whole spectrum.
I think we have to be creative of how we do things. I mean, there are people that love living in that classified space. They legitimately just feel comfortable there. And I have family members that love that space. They live in that space and that they work in that space. Because I work with so many different partners, we're diplomats. We really want to communicate constantly. I remember when I was in Afghanistan, my local national was amazing. He knew everything, knew everybody. And he said, Dexter, there's a suicide bomber in town targeting this warlord, and this is the time frame. And I told some international colleagues, and they shut everything down. They stopped their movements. They just, and then they took out everything and made it classified. And so he couldn't even be in the room when this was being discussed. And I said, I got a solution to this. We're going to meet under the tree outside, and I'm going to have my local national just talk about everything he knows. And nobody has to say anything if they don't feel comfortable saying it, but you need to learn from the experts. You need to be able to communicate in ways that make sense. And we have to do that in the US. Again, a lot of what we classify are sometimes common sense things. And if you don't compromise sources and methods, which is really important, you should be able to talk to key partners. We have different levels that we can talk to our 5i partners about certain things, and certain things are releasable to partners who they directly impact. But as a whole, I want to be able to share as much as I can with all of our coalition.
Dex did a great job of answering that question, and he demonstrated the pragmatism, the common sense approach to declassification. I realize that opinions are swing wildly from declassify everything to put everything behind the green door, as we used to say. All of that said, I would just make the point that Avril Haines, the Director of National Intelligence here in the United States, has talked about the strictures of classification have become too cumbersome. We do, in fact, overclassify. So she has a different view, but it's a bureaucracy, and it's really hard to make the appropriate changes that you need to make to really balance out the need to declassify and the need to maintain secrecy. But what Dex also said was the importance of protecting sources and methods, providing we can protect sources and methods, which translates to human lives, agents on the ground, sources. I think that declassification has been very impactful in terms of Ukraine. And I really take the view that the information, the intelligence rather, that has been declassified has been a bit of a game changer, what we've been able to share with the world. And it also highlights the vast capabilities the United States has. So I think there's always a tension there, but as long as we continue to try to declassify what we can and protect sources and methods, I think there's a happy medium somewhere in there.
So Dex, in our last few minutes, and I know you talked about beginning your career and people that you could look up to, are there any other comments you want to make for young people who want to go into this field, people of color? And then interestingly, a woman in her 60s wants to know, are there ways that people who've had, a full career but weren't aware of this work, are there ways that people who are in the older part of their lives can get into this work? So
that's a wonderful question. It's too bad, you weren't at this stage in World War II, because in World War II, the OSS was using people just like you, that 60-year-old lady. Most folks going into the military are young and somewhat fit. The OSS had Julia Childs. They had all kind of different, levels of ability that were succeeding at all different levels. And that's part of the deception piece, right? As far as going into this field, I think you got to stay flexible. I look at DC and I love DC. I tell folks, if you want to get in this arena, kind of just move here and take that chance, because there's think tanks, there's the administration, there's the private sector, there's obviously the military, there's Capitol Hill, there's universities, there's a lot of people and organizations that are doing really good work in our arena. And so there's a lot of opportunity there. Now, if you're looking for like a government job, that takes time. That takes you learning your craft. That takes you being passionate about what you're doing. That takes you being enthusiastic about what you're doing, because people want that energy. You don't want to work with somebody who's just all about them. You don't want it to be about, okay, me. I'm going to hold on to information because that information makes me important. I tell my team, share as much as you can, like disseminate it. It's important. People die if you don't share information. But I also want them to follow their passion. I want everybody on our team to outgrow their current job and go on and do bigger and better things. And sometimes they come back after that. And you want to support that. You want to be a good human. Understand that people have lives outside of work. And also look at, things don't have to happen on that timeline you want it to happen on. I started writing things on paper, and it's amazing. My 5-year plan happened in 2 years. And, all the stuff I do with the Spy Museum, this is my retirement plan. Opportunities present themselves. When I met Chris, I don't know how many years ago, when we were overseas and I was at Interpol and he was with Tom Bossert, we had no idea we'd be sitting here doing this. If I was not a good person, if he was not a good person, we wouldn't be here right now. I'm not saying that, we do everything perfect, but what I am saying is have good intentions, share information, and, just be honest with yourself. You don't have to have all the answers. Sorry, that's me just being passionate, but this is important to me.
Anything else, Chris, before we wrap it up? Any comments on old people like you and me getting new jobs?
No, I just want to say thanks to Dex again. And what we just heard was a bit of a bonus, and we don't talk enough about leadership. It's implied in some of our discussions. It's implicit in some of our discussions, but you just heard some wisdom from Dex, which is important. It's part of my mantra when I run around and talk about national security policy. I love also to talk about leadership, and you just heard some wisdom from a really, really solid, great leader, and I saw it. It's about relationships, and it's about being human when you're under tremendous pressure and stress. If you can maintain your humanity and you can come out of it a better person. These are things we don't talk about as much as we should, but thanks for that, Dex. Thanks to my team. Thanks for a great spy chat. And as always, our audience makes it so special for us. So I'll kick it back to you, Amanda. I know you want to close out. Thank you very much.
Well, I don't want to close out, but I know people have places to go and things to do. And I can't thank Dex enough for committing to do this wherever he was, because we knew he might be anywhere. So thank you for joining us. And I know you are probably tired, but you were brilliant. Chris, you always give us so much insight. It was all very fascinating. And we want to thank Catherine Wood again for her support of today's program. And as Chris has let you know, our next virtual program is 1 week from today, same time, same place. And that is Spy Chat with Alan Kohler. And that is going to focus heavily on counter intelligence. So that's going to be really fascinating. So we hope that we'll see you there. We're glad you came today. And everyone, if you are in DC, I say play hooky and go outside. Sorry, Chris, that's what I want to do this afternoon. It's beautiful out.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you so much, Chris. You guys are rock stars.
Everyone. Be safe.
Take care, everyone.
Absolutely.